This TTC board meeting to order. The clerk has confirmed that quorum is present. The clerk will now read the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Chair. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit.
Thank you. Commissioners, do any of you wish to declare a conflict of interest in accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, we'll move on. I would like to remind you that this is, Commissioners, the next item is the approval of the meeting minutes of April 13th. Can I please have a motion to approve the minutes? Commissioner Jagdeo, thank you. All those in favor, show of hands, thank you. Moved. I would like to remind you that this is an open meeting as we go through the agenda today. Those of you participating remotely will be required to submit requests to ask questions and to speak on items to the clerk. Each member has 5 minutes for questions and to speak. If you wish to submit a motion on an item, please email your motion to the email address that you have been provided with. You all have been provided with appropriate contact information for technical troubleshooting, and staff also have each of your phone numbers so should they need to contact you for technical reasons. I will now...
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Sorry, it's Councillor Ainsley online. I just wanted to raise on a point of order. I asked for some clarification in the last meeting. I was going to be sent a briefing note on some questions and some issues that I brought up during the CEO's report, and I've never received that briefing note.
Sorry, through the chair. We did send a note to your staff. Do you want me to follow up right away?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Take care of that. No problems.
Thank you. I'll now commence with the review of the order paper. There's the CEO's report, so I will hold that in my name for CEO Leary. We have the approved minutes of the Advisory Committee on Accessible Transit, ACAT, their general monthly meeting for March 30th. I will hold this item for a presentation from ACAT Vice Chair Erica Tanny. Item number 3, the Special Constable Service 2022 Annual Report. I will hold that item in my name for questions of staff. The Islington Station redevelopment is item number 4. We have a speaker on this, so I will hold it as well. Item number 5 is a lease extension at 40 Carl Hall Road. Can I have a motion to adopt this item? Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Holliday. All those in favor? Everybody, thank you. Carried. Number 6. Item number 6 is a Wheel-Trans green bus program, procurement amendment authorization for the purchase of Wheel-Trans vehicles. Can I have a motion to adopt this item? Commissioner Jagdeo, all those in favor? Thank you, that's carried. Number 7, we have a late request for a deputation. Would anyone like to move that we permit the deputation from Mr. Alan Ewell? Anybody? Thanks, Commissioner Moyes. All those in favor? Carried, thank you. So we'll hold that item, of course. And that concludes the review of the order paper. And so the first item, Mr. Leary.
Okay, thank you, sir. I just want to say welcome to our YouTube viewers as well as today's participants to the board's 5th meeting of 2023. Again, welcome Chair, Vice Chair, as well as Commissioners. I want to start this by wishing everyone a happy Asian Heritage Month. At the TTC, the month of May is a time to celebrate the rich culture of Asian Canadians, including TTC employees. Within the organization, we're sharing stories from our employees who are Asian, Southeast Asian, and South Asian heritage. Recognizing Asian Heritage Month is an important part of our broader commitment to be a more equitable and inclusive transit system for everyone. Diversity and inclusion are priorities for this organization, and we continue our work to ensure that TTC reflects the city and communities that we serve. Our 5-year diversity plan really is aimed to embed diversity and inclusion in every facet of the TTC, and I'll give you a few examples. Attracting and developing a more diverse and qualified workforce, building a respectful and inclusive workplace culture by providing continuous education and training on human rights, accessibility, diversity and inclusion, and enhancing the delivery of programs and services to meet the needs of our diverse customer and employee base. So thank you for that. You know, I want to say also a big thank you to the Honorable Krista Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. On April 24th, the Deputy Prime Minister was at Arrow Road Garage, along with our Deputy Mayor Jennifer McKelvey and York Center MP Yakara Sachs, to announce a joint investment of $700 million towards the electrification of the TTC's bus fleet. Now, this new funding clears the way for the purchase of 340 e-buses and 248 bus chargers and related upgrades at 8 TTC garages. And not only is this investment an acknowledgement of the vital role that public transit plays in creating a sustainable and with economic growth, it also affirms that zero-emissions vehicles are the future of our industry. This great news followed two other big announcements in April. One, we revealed 10 newly commissioned e-bus charging pantographs at Birchmount Station. These are part of a pilot project to expand our charging capacity. We also announced the first of 336 new hybrid buses arriving, and they'll start entering service this month. Now, these new vehicles will be replacing existing buses that have reached the end of their useful life. And I'm just let it be known that I am grateful to our partners and extremely proud of the work that staff have done to achieve taking this forward as we look to complete our emissions-free bus service by 2040, or if not sooner. Now, Commissioners, we know people's travel patterns have changed because of the pandemic. However, we've also seen that the reliance on the TTC has not. A post-pandemic high in customer demand was set for the week ending April 28th, in which the average weekday boardings reached 71% of pre-COVID levels. Boardings by mode continue to be highest on bus at 82% of pre-COVID levels, while streetcar and subway boardings are at 60% and 63%, respectively. The increases thus far throughout this year are the results are of the increase are a number of days. The number of days people are going into the office, which is approaching about 2.5 days a week. So it's helping us out tremendously. You know, it's anticipated that office employees will commute to their workplace by 3 days a week by the end of this year. Will help us get to the 75% projection that we put in the budget. And as you all know, last Monday, on May 1st, the 501 and 301 Queen Street cars began diverting both ways between McCall and Broadview via Dundas Street. We also introduced a new and temporary 501B bus branch to minimize the impact on customers traveling through the downtown core along Queen Street. Now, this is the start of a multi-year, multi-phase diversion to accommodate the construction of the Ontario line. I'd let you know that both streetcars and replacement buses will continue to arrive at every 10 minutes or sooner. And the current diversions are expected to remain in place until next spring, when the installation of the new streetcar tracks on Adelaide Street is complete. Now, I'd also like to let you know that the spring station cleaning blitz is now underway. Once again, this year, we're hiring about 100+ post-secondary summer students to join the station's department. 65 students have already started the work, with the remaining to join the ranks later this month. All 75 stations will be covered under this year's blitz, which runs through the end of April. Last year, the blitz team was divided into 13 groups, each spending a week at a time at an assigned station. Duties for the new staff will include everything from manually scrubbing walls and stairs, detailed cleaning of stainless steel doors and window frames, waste receptacles, elevators, escalators, benches, and as well as all other features. So we know they did a great job this year, and I'm looking forward to the work they do this year. A longer period of time and more people in, so it'll be great. Commissioners, as you know, the safety of our customers and employees remains a top priority for the TTC. We've launched 2 new station resource videos. Now, these videos are designed to let customers know what they should do in the case of an emergency while in a subway station. Now, the first video focuses on emergency resources in subway stations, And you've heard me many times talk about the designated wait areas or the assistance intercom. So I'm going to ask staff if they'd play this video, please.
There are a number of features throughout the TTC system to provide assistance, safety, and security on your journey. If you require assistance in a TTC subway station during an emergency or at any time, trained TTC employees are on site and prepared to help. Whenever possible, report an emergency directly to a TTC employee who can easily be identified by their uniform and TTC crest. Every TTC subway station platform has a designated waiting area, or DWA, equipped with an overhead camera, assistance intercom with an emergency button that connects directly to TTC staff, extra lighting, and a payphone. Intercoms are also located in and around elevators and entrances without station collectors. If you see someone in medical distress, a fire, or you feel your safety is at risk, go to the DWA and press the red emergency button on the assistance intercom. You can speak directly to TTC staff, who can see the platform from the overhead camera and send help. If you see a situation on a subway train that requires emergency medical, fire, or police services, press the yellow emergency strip located above the windows, along wheelchair positions, and near subway car doors. The alarm will sound in your train car and the operator's car. Transit control is immediately alerted, where specially trained staff assess the situation and contact 911. The train will continue to the next station and hold there with the doors open while the operator investigates and updates transit control, and emergency services arrive on site. Activated emergency alarms can delay subway service from 2 to 20 minutes. The operator will provide audible updates through the train's PA system. For more information about what to do in case of an emergency and the ways we continue to enhance safety and security on the TTC, visit ttc.ca/riding the TTC.
Thank you for that. We have one more video that we'd also like to show, and this video explains the various roles and responsibilities of people working in the subway stations. So if we could show that, please.
Every TTC station has a number of trained employees on site and prepared to help. TTC operators, station collectors, supervisors, special constables, customer service agents, and maintenance staff are available to help and easily identified by their uniform and TTC crest. Station collectors are visible at the main fare line of all stations on Line 2, 3, and 4, and from Finch to Glencairn stations on Line 1. They verify fare payment and are there to answer questions and provide any help needed. Station supervisors oversee the management of their assigned stations. They are highly visible in stations and on station platforms during morning and afternoon rush hours. Station supervisors provide customer service and are trained to de-escalate any issues that may arise. Mobile supervisors move across the system in designated TTC vehicles, responding quickly to incidents and supporting the safe resumption of service after incidents happen. They provide customer service and are trained to de-escalate any issues that may arise. Customer service agents are found at the main fare line at all Line 1 extension stations, from Vaughan Metropolitan Center to Lawrence West. They are available to answer any questions and provide any help needed. special constables patrol the TTC system on foot, in subway trains, and in TTC-branded vehicles, and are responsible for the safety and security of customers, employees, and property. This year, up to 50 additional special constables will be hired to enhance safety and security across the system. Janitors and service persons work at various stations at different times of the day and night, ensuring the system is clean and clear. If you need assistance of any kind, see someone else who does, or you notice something that needs attention, tell a uniformed TTC employee. Action will be taken right away to ensure the system is safe, clean, and clear for everyone. For more information about TTC subway station resources and safety features, visit ttc.ca/riding the TTC.
Thank you for that as well. I'll just let everyone know that these two videos are playing on screens within the subway stations, on our social media, as well as the internal communication channels at the TTC. I also want to make sure I just clarify on when I was talking about the station program, that the cleaners will be here through August. I'm not sure I said that, so through August, May through August, which will be nice. I'd also like to acknowledge a TTC milestone approaching us 2 days from now. 55 years ago, on May 10th, 1968, the Bloor-Danforth subway was officially extended west to Islington Station in Etobicoke and east to Woodland Station in Scarborough. The two extensions from Kiel in the west and from Woodbine on the east increased the total length of the TC's Bloor-Danforth line, line 2 as we call it, to 22.5 kilometers. And as you can see in the photos shown above, Etobicoke Mayor Edward Horton, as well as Scarborough Mayor Albert Campbell, lent a hand at the official breakthrough. So time goes so fast. Finally, Chair, I'd want to provide the board with some additional information to a conversation we started at the last meeting with respect to the approach to service planning. And to do that, I want to ask Lawrence Louie, if our head of service planning, if he'd give you a quick presentation, a service planning 101, for instance, if you will. Lawrence has been with the TTC on and off for 20 years and is one of the most knowledgeable people I know when it comes to the science of service planning. So with that, Lawrence, if you would you give the presentation, please?
Great, thank you, Rick, for that presentation, or for that introduction, and thank you to the chair and the board for an opportunity for us to share more information about how we monitor, plan, and adjust service at the TTC. As Rick said, the nuts and bolts and science behind service planning. Do we have that? Sorry, just 1 second here. Here, I got it up here. So this is very important for us to articulate as we return to a more steady state of planning while continuously seeking new ways to integrate equity and diversity into our process and to improve how we respond to the unexpected. Today, I'm happy to share how many of these aspects come together on our ongoing service monitoring and improvement process, and how service changes, data monitoring, and demand responsive service work together in a continuous process. I'll start by talking about that process. The past few years have been very difficult from a planning perspective. During the pandemic, we learned to become more nimble in a context of rapidly changing needs, while implementing new tools for data analysis and gaining experience in operating and managing demand responsive service. We are now adapting that experience into improving our processes as outlined on this slide. This is just a start of the modernization of how TTC plans and schedules its service. Part of that is recognizing that we need to do a better job in engaging with our communities and building a better understanding around how we make our planning decisions, and we see this as the first start of that conversation. I do want to reiterate that equity and diversity has always been core to service planning at the TTC. We have an equity lens to service planning, which has helped to protect service coverage and periods of service in areas with greater need. It has also led to new services to be introduced in communities with priority populations, and is part of the reason why we have key networks such as our 10-minute network and overnight service. We continue to work with the city and our other partners to integrate demographic, geographic, and ridership analyses to better understand community needs and ridership patterns. I also want to highlight that we engaged youth and other priority groups through our planning process. We have expanded our youth engagement through our annual service plan. We conduct regular focus groups with women, low-income, and shift workers, and we are looking at new ways of engaging on an ongoing basis and through our 5-year service plan. For example, my team recently had an opportunity to attend the Transportation Research Board Conference in Washington, D.C. in January, where we had an opportunity to exchange experiences and ideas with colleagues and researchers from all around the world who all see that equity and diversity are very important and we need to act better on it in transit and transportation. Today's presentation, I will focus on that middle portion in this slide, where how we are monitoring ridership and service needs and how that relates to our demand responsive service, which continues to evolve as we trial ways to address service gaps, variability in demand, and overcrowding. First, we'd like to highlight some of the core components of our regular service planning process. There are 4 major categories to our service changes that we make every 6 weeks or so. You hear about them as board periods or service periods from a scheduled perspective, recognizing that we do make day-to-day adjustments on an unscheduled basis using our demand-responsive resources. This year, with continuing uncertainty around construction and service demand, we are increasing our use of demand-responsive service with extra buses and streetcars, and I'll talk about this a lot through this presentation, as you can already notice. First, we have our service frequency and route adjustments, which we apply our service standards to make changes, where we monitor various aspects of transit use and operational need. We look at boardings and demand at a fine detail to adjust frequency and capacity, reallocating from less busy parts of the system to busier ones. We also assess overall trends in ridership as part of our responsibility to ensure public investment in transit is being used effectively. The second component are seasonal service changes, some of which happened today. We make these changes at various times of year, especially when we're looking at service to high schools, colleges, and universities. We also make changes to serve seasonal destinations such as Bluffers Park, Cherry Beach, and the zoo. We launched seasonal service rebranding yesterday, including a new 200 Toronto Zoo service from Rouge Hill GO Station to the zoo. Third, as most of our bus and streetcar routes operate in mixed traffic, we continue to adjust schedules on routes across the city to improve on-time performance, which we define as a vehicle leaving the ends of the route no earlier than 59 seconds and no later than 4 minutes and 59 seconds from schedule. We do this by providing time and schedules to reflect observed delays, and we call this recovery time, which is taken at our bus terminals, streetcar loops, and on streets end of line. The last component of our service changes is one that will be a greater focus in the coming years: construction. While we've always dealt with construction as TTC, the city is undergoing a major period of infrastructure renewal alongside construction on some new transit expansion projects. So we are taking an even greater focus on how we plan, coordinate, and deliver this service. Our priorities when it comes to construction include maintaining service capacity and reliability by putting on more buses and streetcars on route, both scheduled and demand responsive, to account for delays and diversions. We plan ahead and coordinate wherever we can, especially with our partners at the City of Toronto and Metrolinx. And we also, on an annual basis, identify the resource and cost implications up front to make sure that we have the resources that we need to deliver the service. The projects for the 2023 season are highlighted on the map. These are the big ones, but we also know that there are many smaller disruptions, special events, and short-term projects that will impact service. Demand responsive service will allow us to adjust for these on an ongoing basis. Speaking of the buses that we've allocated for construction, this is part of that conversation about bus availability, spare ratios, and surplus fleet. As mentioned, we plan the buses that we need for construction as part of our annual budget process, including a contingency knowing that project scopes and schedules will change frequently, even with our best intentions. The graph on the right show how the bus requirements for construction ramps out throughout the year, from just 20 buses allocated to construction in January to 145 in September. Protecting for this peak means that the number of spare and surplus buses will vary throughout the year. In September, that means that 86% of our surplus fleet above what we have on our regular base service will be used for construction. We will continue to refine these numbers through our 2024 annual service plan and construction plans and our 5-year service plan to define our bus needs in the coming years. I'm going to now pivot to how we are leveraging better data, especially as we are aligning service to ridership across the city while making day-to-day adjustments to make sure we don't leave anyone behind. On ridership, we consider data from 3 sources. First, we track what we hear from our customers. We have a call every morning where we get a summary of customer complaints, and this directs our immediate investigations while keeping an eye on longer-term trends. Second, we have automatic passenger counters on every single bus and most of our streetcars. This captures people getting on and off our vehicles using infrared sensors, regardless of how a customer pays their fare. Lastly, we reference this across with our Presto data, which provides overall trends on system ridership. On monitoring bus occupancy, we look at trips that operate at both 100% and 120% of our planning standard, which is directly related to how frequently we run a service. Where we see trips exceeding 100% of the standard, or 50 people per bus, we will flag the route to monitor trends for future service reallocation. With increasing ridership now, we are refocusing our attention on trips that are very busy, exceeding 120% of the standard, or 60 people per bus. Why is this important? While 60 people on a bus is not a crush capacity, it does start to impact our customer experience, and it's the threshold where we will start to investigate and determine if immediate action is needed by deploying demand responsive service to ensure we don't leave our customers behind. The charts on this slide show the bus occupancy trends as seen in the CEO report, with a greater focus on trends since last fall with the chart on the right. As ridership has grown, the number and proportion of these very busy trips that are over 120% of our planning standard remains steady at approximately 0.4% of, or fewer than 130 of over 30,500 trips that we operate each week. Of course, we want to keep this number as low as possible, and we investigate where and when these trips happen, especially if there's a change in trend. I'll speak shortly about how we are monitoring and responding to this data. But first, I want to talk about that demand responsive service and its role today, after relying on it heavily to adjust to needs during the pandemic. Demand responsive service is a pool of extra buses, streetcars, and subway trains that we deploy dynamically every day. We plan on having these extra vehicles in advance if we know there will be need, such as ensuring enough support for weekend subway closures or to provide contingency for construction projects. Based on day-to-day conditions, such as operator availability through decreased absenteeism or new training graduates, we can provide more extras given we have the spare vehicles ready to go. We deploy the service by working together as planning and operations team each week to define a plan based on crowding reports, customer feedback, and understanding what is coming in terms of construction, subway closures, and special events. This plan provides a framework for transit control to deploy and manage the service, recognizing that day-to-day priorities will take precedence. We refine this process and recognize the potential that demand responsive service provides. We do know that the greatest challenge is that these vehicles, as they are unscheduled extra service, are not visible in our online trip planning or real-time information data, similar to unscheduled diversions. This is a challenge that's faced by many transit agencies across the world, especially as more customers are relying on our real-time tools. We continue to test a tool in our Vision route management system to add extra vehicles and diversions into our real-time feed, but in the meantime, we are exploring operational approaches and improving our communications to let customers know when there's extra service on their route. Even with those challenges, though, our recent trial on focusing responses to overcrowding are positive. We worked on 6 routes, deploying 22 buses on trips to deal with trips where we're seeing 55 to 65 or more people on the bus. This is a targeted response we would not have been able to do as quickly several years ago. In adding these trips, we did see crowding on the scheduled service trips reduced by approximately 15%, meaning there's more space for customers on these trips, which included some very early morning and very late evening trips that serve shift workers. Where these trips are successful, we will make a formal schedule change. Where they are not, we would just reallocate those buses to meet other needs. Lastly, this map represents the data that we used from March to identify where and when to put extra trips. In diagnosing these hotspots, we knew that some were temporary, such as construction affecting service on Islington, Eglinton, and Parliament. We've added these trips on some of the routes focused on this map, some of them with customers that are from neighborhood improvement areas. After deploying that extra service, we monitored that change in crowding, and while we had some new areas of overcrowding pop up in late April, there's visible improvement in some of those hotspots that we saw in March, including on the Wilson Corridor, Keele, York Mills, and Morningside. We will continue to redeploy and move service around based on where crowding is persisting and where new ones pop up, and where extra trips aren't solving the issue, we will look at service increases on these corridors. So lastly, where do we go from here? We will continue to fine-tune our process, and we'll continue to monitor and adjust service this spring, especially with this busy construction period ahead. We have made great strides in improving service resiliency in the past year, so we have the vehicles and operators to respond if needs change. With more ridership data and customer feedback, we are now looking to the fall, where we will make service adjustments to our base service. And speaking of customer feedback, I would like to highlight that we have started our first phase of customer, community, and frontline engagement on our 2024 annual service plan. The survey is online now till May 18th on ttc5yearplans.ca, and we look forward to bringing that plan to you this fall and early next year. Thank you again to the board for your time.
Thank you, Lawrence. Very, very thorough overview, and I appreciate that. So as everyone can see, there's much more to service planning than just lines on a map or numbers on a schedule. There's a lot of data and analytics and equity considerations that go into it as well. Lawrence, you did throw up a softball for me by mentioning the word absenteeism. So I'm pleased to tell the board here today that working with our union partners, we've actually been seeing absenteeism at a much lower rate than we budgeted for in 2023. In our 2023 budget, we built a service resiliency into it to ensure that we had enough operators available to cover our scheduled service in the event of a resurgence of COVID. We haven't seen that, and as a result of the lower absenteeism rate, I can now advise you that we're reinvesting resources into service. And the first service restoration I've directed is the return to the 6-minute or better service late night on line 1 and line 2. We've had a lot of discussion with Lawrence and his team about where we can invest this service, and that's where we're starting out. You know, we've heard from many people that they're uncomfortable at the proposed 8 minutes waits, and we've responded. As well, we'll have the ability to add additional resources to address some of those busy routes that Lawrence has identified as well across the city. This will be done in real time through our Transit Control Center, again, as Lawrence identified how we work that. So I'm proud of how we're working smarter in this organization and to preserve and enhance the service when and where it is needed the most. So thank you for that, Lawrence, and an entire team. Finally, Chair, I'll remind everyone that next board meeting is scheduled for Monday, June 12th, and I'd say that concludes our opening remarks, and we're here to take questions as you have them. Thank you.
Any questions? Go ahead. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You raised the issue of construction planning in the service planning, Lawrence, and I'm curious with the Queen Street closure that's going to be in place for many years. Have we also looked at what we think the anticipated travel times are going to do through that construction period? And are there any strategies to try to reduce any deterioration in travel times during that period?
Through the chair, so we have been working very closely with Metrolinx and our city partners to understand what that impact will be. The consultants that are involved with Metrolinx's project have provided us forecasts in terms of travel time delay, but that provides us a base where we're working with the city to provide more priority measures, such as on Dundas, making sure that we have a good understanding of that. We know that this is going to be a plan that we need to adapt and change as the years go on, or as even the weeks go on. So for example, today we realized some of the concerns that people had about travel from Queen East into the financial district. So we've added some extra buses operating from Queen East down King Street, where we have transit priority into the financial core to help some of that travel. So we know we need to be nimble and we need to adjust, and we'll continue working with the city and our Metrolinx partners on that.
Commissioner Moyes, and then Commissioner Holliday.
Thank you. This is questions for you and for you, or is it just? Okay, that's good to know. Thank you, through the chair. I listened to your presentation, Lawrence, and it's on the surface, I do like it. But the reality is, on the ground, that's not what's happening, based on what I'm seeing and on the feedback. So, again, I've been hearing that we're reducing service on line 1. We've reduced service on certain bus routes. The CEO also mentioned, too, in his report that more people are going back to the office and working downtown, which also increase transit use. So I just feel that there's a disconnect between the report that you've presented here and the feedback I'm getting and seeing and hearing from the public. So perhaps somebody can respond to that.
So through the chair, the service adjustments that have been made to align to ridership are based on the data that we're seeing. It is, like I mentioned, we have many sources of that data. The APC data that we get from our buses and vehicles is probably the most accurate in terms of seeing, exactly where people are getting on and off. We know that delays creates a gap that might create, more crowding on a subsequent trip, and that's why we're tracking that 120% number, like I said, very closely. Like, we do expect that some hotspots might pop up over the next couple weeks with all the construction going on, and that's when we will respond right away to make sure we keep those down. This is part of our day-to-day process, and we're confident right now that we are close and at our standards in terms of crowding on our service.
And if I could, through the chair, just adding, and I always remind everyone that when we put the 2023 budget together, we really took into consideration the pre-COVID demand numbers, right? And so we know that we're providing 91% of pre-COVID service hours, right? For now, 71% of ridership, and we projected to get to 75 by the end of the year. So we really match this and line it up together when we're making these decisions. And having the extra vehicles available on a daily basis is really nice, because there was a day when we had thousands and thousands of short turns, and we started the demand service at that point so that we could run the routes and get the true timing of end to end. And now what we're doing is we're using the data and the stats from the systems that we've purchased over the last 5 or 6 years to really use that data to do much more analytics to make sure we provide a much better and higher quality service.
Just to add to that a little bit too, I do read the reports, and I listen to the CEO's reports as well when I'm here. And I still have to listen to the evening news to find out about reduction in bus routes and reduction on trains on line 1. Why are we not receiving this information at these meetings or as commissioners of TTC?
So through the chair, Lawrence, would you give us an overview of how we distribute the information on Natalie as well? Because we have a regular process from when notifying the public.
But as a commissioner, though, I should get that information in advance.
Through the chair, we set our amount of service hours that we put on the road through our annual budget process that is defined on a monthly basis, and how we implement that change is done on an ongoing 6-week basis. We have 10 opportunities to change service every year. And we call those our board periods, our service periods. We adjust those. We work on a draft roughly 3 or 4 months in advance of those changes, which is an internal working document while we align our resources across the organization. We can look at opportunities to improve how we provide that information in advance to the board, and we'll look forward to that conversation.
Okay. And just as a sidebar, for example, the Scarborough Rapid Transit study, which is at a cost of $2.9 million, the board, or someone has decided to pay for that study. I support that, but in the same token, I'm not quite sure where that funds are coming from. Like, who authorized that, and where is it coming from?
So through the chair, I believe this is going to be an issue for City Council this coming week. So to date, the funding that we have authorized was to get us to 30% design on that particular project. And so the balance of the funding that's required to proceed with that project is roughly about $57 million. And 2.9 million is to take the design from 30% to 100%. So I believe that's subject to a discussion at council this coming week. And we will be looking at what opportunities there are for that funding to complete the design.
And just one final question. I appreciate the videos. They're very well put together. But what caused me to take pause was when he said that they're pay phones people have to pay for. Should we not have courtesy phones at this point in time? Rather than paying a bell, $2, whatever fee?
Through the chair, we do have phones as well that are courtesy phones and the buttons to push for that, but we also do have pay phones in our systems.
Okay.
So you have a number of ways to get to the transit control.
Thank you. That was your final question. Commissioner Holiday.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentations. I guess my first question is for Lawrence. Lawrence, when you're planning routes, I know sometimes routes have two buses on them. One is a local bus and one is a express bus. And I just wondered if you could comment a little bit on the dynamic between the planning for the two of them, because the crowding and the crowding at stops could be affected by both of those buses.
Through the chair, when we introduce an express service on any corridor, and usually we decide those based on how busy they are and also the travel patterns on how far customers are traveling on that corridor, we do make a projection based on our ridership modeling on how many customers would migrate from the local service to the express. So we adjust the local service typically a little down while introducing the express service, just to make sure that we're using our resources properly. We know our express stops are also the busiest stops along the route, so at those stops you would have the combined effect of both the local and express service to provide that extra capacity.
Okay. Second question for you, and then I'll change subject matter, but often when a member of council, and I know specifically myself, attends development consultation meetings, somebody's proposing a new condo tower, the question always comes up, you know, the bus is already crowded or there's a problem, you know, how's the TTC going to manage all of the extra people? And I don't know that it's efficient to suggest that TTC attend every community consultation meeting to answer that question, but I wondered if there was a way that it could be better answered or set up so that some official somewhere could provide some assurance to the public. Because I think the takeaway I took from your presentation is that you rotate on a 6-week cycle and you react to when the population changes. So you wouldn't put a bus out because a development project started, but you would watch as the population took it. And I think sometimes answers or structured answers around that would offer a lot of assurance. So I don't know if you have any suggestions on how that could be accomplished, but maybe it's a comment / a question, but it's a gap.
Through the chair, the TTC, you know, our service planning, our planning groups are involved with the city, and when it comes to secondary plans, official plan reviews, and we also review all development applications, and we get the transportation impact statement. So while we're not in there in person, we are analyzing these developments as they come along through our annual service plan and our 5-year service plan, where we get the whole forecast in terms of developments and how many people that may be, and we add that as part of one of the initiatives is to have hours available to respond to development, and this will be, you will see this in later this year and early next year in terms of our plans on how we want to have new hours of service to serve these new developments.
May I suggest, in the form of a question, if it would be possible to give even a paragraph or two of standard language to the city planners that encapsulates what we just talked about in a very brief way, or a slide or something that would aid them as they navigate community consultation meetings to give the answer?
Through the chair, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to just switch to security very quickly. Mr. Chair, I'm going to take a quick liberty as well just to say thank you to TTC staff and Toronto Public Service staff. Folks may not be aware, but on city-issued phones, there are accredited applications, and the Safe TTC app was made an accredited application. And so that means that all Toronto Public Service employees that use a city-issued device can click that app with one click. and it's put onto the phone, which is really good news because in my view, that's extra eyes and ears. And that's been advertised within the Toronto Public Service. So I just wanted to say there was a lot of coordination and cooperation that went on between the agency and to the technical staff, and I thought that was a good news story. But I'm just going to ask a question about the Safe TTC app. I thought the videos were wonderful. Is it possible to push the links or the notification of the videos out through the Safe TTC app or through various subscriber lists that we have? Because I think they should be put out there for people to watch. You know, I've been using the TTC for a long time, and I even learned some things from that video. So I don't know if that's an ask, a put.
Through the chair, we're pushing it on all our social media levels and in different places, including our stakeholder newsletter, but we will push harder to make sure you see it. Thank you.
And I had one other thought, if it was possible to do. Reminds me of kind of like getting on the airplane. They show you that safety video. But I just wondered if there already was one or there could be one that might be geared towards students. So the idea would be if a teacher is taking a class on a trip, using the TTC, they could show the class a video. I mean, that's far more relevant in 2023 than it was, say, 10 years ago. But, you know, it might get, especially younger kids, a little more used to what they might see and experience on the TTC. And very interesting, right? If the alarm is pressed, what happens? What do? You may never encounter that, but if you do and you've seen the video, maybe that's a little bit more fun and easy to absorb the message. And so it's just a suggestion, and then of course is to get those pushed out to the school boards and they can share it with the students, and if that's doable, that would be great. And I think that's...
So maybe I can address your question. I think that's an excellent idea. And we have our special constables that has a community safety engagement program that goes to schools. Right. And I think we can incorporate those videos definitely into as part of that program. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Osborne? And then
just a quick one for our CEO about the safety presentation. I'm wondering, I believe our special constables are given Narcan that they can administer as and when needed. I'm wondering if we have any in our stations, in the subway stations themselves, so that if there is not a special constable present, that steps can be taken.
Through the chair, no, at this juncture, we don't. It's the special constables, as well as I'm going to look at the chief safety officer. We just finished training our station supervisors as well. If you could just jump in for me, please.
Yeah, through the chair. Excellent question. Actually, this is something that we are currently looking at. We're reviewing to see if we can provide them in the stations. But as Rick mentioned, we are training our station supervisors on not only first aid, but also on Narcan administration. But this is something that's an active conversation right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a really good idea.
Thank you, Commissioner Jagdeo.
Thank you, Chair Burnside. One comment and then a quick question. I think the presentation, Lawrence, that you gave on how we're planning service, I think is pretty interesting. It's very informative, and I wonder if there's a way for us to push that out to the general population. I think the more knowledge that the public has on how we do things will drive a bit more empathy on why things happen, why there may be delays on certain areas of the transit, and the more knowledge, the better. My second question is on the on-time performance for the streetcars. So I understand right now that we're not hitting anywhere near where we want to be. One of the biggest levers for that, obviously, is construction. But then there's one sentence in here around the 7 routes that were not affected by construction. OTP was around 81%, which is still lower than what we want it to be. What are some of the drivers for that, and how are we trying to solve for it? Because I tried to read through it, and I didn't see any sort of solutioning or an analysis on why that was happening.
Through the chair, so thank you about the comment about the planning process. That's a big priority for my team right now, is to increase knowledge. But then in terms of streetcar on-time performance, Obviously, like you mentioned, there's a lot of changing conditions constantly, so we are almost in a constant catch-up mode in terms of trying to figure out what the travel conditions are to adjust the schedules. We also know that when we have overlapping streetcar routes because of construction, that ends up affecting the other one. So it's just a constant game of catch-up, and we realize that, and this is why we have more run-as-directed streetcars now, to try to fill those gaps, while at the same time we are looking at different measures for on-time performance on streetcar when they're affected by construction, to make sure that the service is regular and reliable and evenly spaced out, which means just as much as whether or not it is leaving the ends on time for streetcar.
And if I could, through the chair on that, I believe it was Council Ainsley asked the question last month about how we measure the runners-directed vehicles, because we don't have the ability as of right now to measure them on our clever device system, and that's how we track the on-time performance. And as Lawrence said, that's the critical part of having these extra vehicles, sliding them in when we know there's a delay. We just need to build that into the technology so we get that data.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, I just have a couple. Not sure if it's to yourself or to Mr. Leary, but pre-COVID, on line 1, morning rush hour, were people waiting for trains in that, like waiting for additional trains to go? Like one would go by and they were full, and they'd have to wait for 2 or 3 trains?
If I could, Chair, you're absolutely correct. If you were at Queen in the afternoon, many times you'd have to wait 2, get on the 3rd train. You know, I use the Davisville service quite often, and to go northbound at Davisville, it wasn't uncommon to have to wait a train or 2.
Okay, thank you. So is that happening now? Are people having to wait or let trains go by because they're full?
Not that we're aware of. Lawrence, if you have any latest information, jump in, but on a daily basis, we have information coming from the field, and we're not hearing that.
And through the chair, we do have, now that we have full ATC in place on line 1, which we did not have before the pandemic, that does help us operate more service if we need to. But from our current data in terms of the ridership, that demand southbound from Bloor Young, which is the biggest pinch point, obviously, we're not seeing as significant in terms of overcrowding where people are being.
Yeah, sorry, it was just a straight question. Are we seeing? Do people have to wait more than 1 train because of overcrowding?
Through the chair, no.
Thank you. So, could one argue that actually service for people has improved on line 1 at certain times of the day, at least?
Through the chair, we remain to our service standards, which is to make sure people get on the train.
Okay, thanks. Pre-COVID, whatever that service level was, that baseline number, how did you determine what that baseline number was? In terms of service, like number of buses, number of trains, number of streetcars?
So our level of service is, through the chair, the level of service that we define is based on the total hours of service we have on the road, whether it be the operators running subways, streetcars, buses. That is 100%, and that is a baseline pre-COVID, and then our current hours are compared to that.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't articulate that too well, but how did you determine what that baseline number would be? Like, how did you determine service on, let's just pick line 1. How did you determine the number of trains that you would run on line 1? What were the factors? Like maybe the number of riders?
Through you, Chair, yes, the number of riders. So based on our service standard, 1,100 people per train on average.
Okay, thank you. And so that baseline, and so now just to keep, I'll say, pounding the message, we're offering 91% of pre-COVID service for 71% of the passengers. So we're actually over-serving in terms of, maybe not in terms of times between trains, but in terms of the level of service compared to the actual number of users. Is that fair to say?
Through you, Chair, that's correct. And we've also made sure to protect our bus service in particular. Some of those subway hours were used to make sure that we have that bus service where people need it the most throughout the city.
Thank you. And what would the cost, last question, what would the cost be to go back to that baseline number of 100% when?
So through the chair, if we were to restore back to pre-COVID 100%, it'd be $75 million annualized.
Do we have a budget for that 75 million?
Through the chair, no, not at the moment.
So we're basically, I don't know if I can use analogies, but flogging and horses and all those things. The place for that discussion is probably at City Council.
Through the chair, the funding for that would be.
Okay, thank you. And then I do have a question to follow up on Commissioner Moyes' question, is about the board getting information about I'll say the sensitive topics such as reducing service, rightly or wrongly. Everyone has an opinion on that. If that information isn't being sent to the board prior to the meeting, like a week in advance, when you know that, can you maybe explain why that isn't the case? And
through the chair, I'll take this one, and then I'm going to try to turn that if I could. Councilor Moyes had a great question. We notify the public through our communications channels without forwarding it to the board directly. We will be forwarding it to the board directly for now on. I'd also make note, as you and I had previously talked, in February when we came and we gave an outline of the service that was provided in the 23 budget, we showed significant changes. It had been 12 years since anything had been brought to the board, but you and I discussing earlier, we'll make sure that we bring things to the board that would be considered significant to the public in the future.
okay, thank you. Because I think it just leaves board members a little flat-footed, and if you're on the board, I would think that it might be helpful for us to get that information as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any speakers? No speakers? Okay, can I have a motion to receive the CEO's report, please? Commissioner Lalonde, thank you. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Item number 2 is the approved minutes of the advisory committee. I'll turn the microphone over to Erica Tang, who is the ACAT vice chair. Hi, Erica.
Hello, good morning. Just verifying my audio, is my audio on?
Yeah, it's great.
Thank you. So thank you for having me here today. My name is Erica Tanny. As mentioned, I am one of the 2 vice chairs of ACAT this year. The ACAT chair, Anita, sends her regrets today. I'm here to present the March ACAT meeting minutes. ACAT has had several ongoing projects, and those projects continue. At March meeting, some of the issues raised included the bus and streetcar snow clearing, and that is something that will be a priority for ACAT moving into the fall, particularly in the 4th quarter of this year. As we know, clearing along the streetcar platforms, in particular along the King Street corridor, is critical to the success of the family of services trips, which is where customers transition between a blend of different accessible Wheel-Trans buses, streetcars, and subways. In March, the Communications and Service Planning subcommittees did not meet. Their projects are ongoing, and we expect that there will be an update at the next meeting. With respect to the Wheel-Trans subcommittee, there are plans right now to upgrade the system to provide real-time tracking of vehicles, and this will improve for passengers the experience as well as their connection with Wheel-Trans services and reduce misused or missed rides. The fleet itself continues to be upgraded and improved with the inclusion of the 7M ProMaster buses, which are capable of accommodating larger mobility devices. And we're continuing a policy right now to require masking on Wheel-Trans, and that's specific to the unique vulnerability of the kinds of passengers that travel on Wheel-Trans services. With respect to the design review subcommittee, there were several design review issues that have been addressed, including at the York University station. There was a review of the escalator and elevator and some recommendations which were made. And specifically at the York University subway station, there were discussions regarding the correction of a design flaw, which involved the railings on the stairways. Now, this is a design flaw which has been corrected in future stations, although ACAT did want to note that ACAT had raised this design flaw prior to the construction of the station, and unfortunately, the architect's plans had been followed rather than the ACAT recommendations, and now we're having to make those corrections after the fact. And that's relevant to a motion which was passed in ACAT, which I'll raise in a moment. Some other issues which were discussed in the design review subcommittee. There was a discussion regarding an issue that was raised by a member of the public and an advocacy group that has raised this issue with ACAT regarding the subway platform edge barriers in the Bloor-Yonge station. That's a complex issue of cost and technical requirements, and the ACAT Design Review Subcommittee continues to study that issue. There was a motion passed in ACAT regarding the subway extension project at the Scarborough Centre station. ACAT has requested the rejection of the Scarborough Centre station design, specifically the design that requires 3 levels of elevators for passengers to move through from the bus platform down to the train level. And if you're looking at the ACAT minutes, it's page 9 of the minutes that has specific details about that motion. So the request is for elevators to be extended to the lower concourse directly, so vertical extension, so that there's it's a more seamless and efficient vertical connection from the subway platform to the bus terminal. The other thing that had been noted was that the navigation from the bus platform to the remainder of the system generally requires the use of multiple elevators and pathways, and that the current design promotes some challenges of bottlenecking where passengers move from 4 to 2 elevators, and that's going to have significant impact, we project, on accessibility. The other issue that had been noted regarding that station, there's a request from ACAT to create a fair paid zone so that users are not having to tap their Presto card multiple times, multiple locations as they move through the station. That, of course, poses a barrier to individuals who use mobility devices, and as well individuals with sensory issues who have to locate those tap locations. So certainly the motion regarding the subway extension project at the Scarborough Centre, I think ACAT believes fits seamlessly with its discussion regarding the York University modifications to the prior design flaws. And we're hoping that ACAT's concerns will be appropriately addressed so that we're not repeating history with respect to this station. ACAT has a long-standing committee that has been assisting the TTC to meet the gold standard for accessibility. And as the Toronto Transit System engages other stakeholders in the delivery of its transit services, such as Metrolinx, and integrates with other transit systems in the GTA, it's critical to ensure that ACAT remains a strong voice at the table, and that the TTC and City's priority for excellent transit accessibility is not diluted through the challenges with shared service provision. As always, ACAT is pleased to collaborate with its partners in the TTC and with the City to create a more accessible transit system that responds to the needs of all users. I would be pleased to address any questions or comments. And because I can never leave without adding an additional comment, I've been listening to the comments today, and I heard the suggestion regarding a TTC video or presentation targeting younger students in the community engagement program. And I would add a suggestion that perhaps there's a consideration that there be an ACAT accessibility component added to that regarding, the expectations of the blue seating on buses or sensitization of the public, particularly children, towards expected inclusive behavior on the TTC. So subject to any questions, those are my submissions for today. And I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Holliday.
Thank you to the Vice Chair from ACAT, and I don't know if this question is best for the Vice Chair or for staff, but I wondered if someone could explain to the board exactly what happened with the railings at York University Station. And if there's incremental cost, who dealt with that? Or is there incremental cost due to any changes or concerns with it?
Thank you for your question. I can provide just a brief background. I can't address the cost issue, but I can say that the issue with the railings is that as individuals move down through the stairway, there's a break in the railings when there's a platform between. So you'll descend a flight of stairs, there'll be a platform and a further continued flight of stairs. And there's a break in the railing, and of course that poses challenges for wayfinding for individuals who are visually impaired because they use the railing to guide the direction of movement. With respect to cost, I'll turn that over to someone who would better be able to answer that.
Okay, we may or may not have an accounting of cost. Could you just elaborate for me a bit more? Is it a violation of code or a design best practice? Or was it something that the committee turned up and said there were concerns with it, but there isn't necessarily a deficiency? I'm just trying to understand where it went off track.
It's an excellent question. In fairness, I can advise that at the time this was being discussed, I was certainly not a member of ACAT. My understanding from those meeting minutes and from the study that has been done by the design review, it certainly is a concern for meeting the standard of wayfinding today. As we know, wayfinding standards have changed over time, and ACAT at all times strives to address the standards as they change. Aside from that, I don't know that I can provide a specific answer to your question, except to note that ACAT had raised this as a concern, as we do with all wayfinding issues, and as we are now raising a significant concern with the Scarborough project.
I appreciate that, and I think just to confirm from my reading of the minutes, it now rests that it will be looked at when the station is next time renovated, and that there wasn't success in getting it to be changed, but it will be changed in the future if your request is followed through on.
That is my understanding, yes.
Thanks so much.
Any other questions? Commissioner Moyes?
Just to piggyback on Councillor Holliday's comments, whose responsibility is it to find these gaps in the system when it comes to OEDA? Just listening to the Vice Chair's comments, it feels like they have to go around the system and find deficiencies rather than we as a Transit Commission finding these deficiencies and bringing them up to standard. I'm not sure who that question is for, but.
I'll take that, Chair. Through the chair, if I could. We work very closely with ACAT in identifying different accessibility challenges throughout the stations. I would like to give you an example. For instance, Fort Monaco and his team are now working with them on the platform on the northbound side of Davisville, knowing that when it was built, it made a narrow part of the platform to have a small shelter. So we're working with our operating departments of what we can do to move that shelter. As things get identified, we try to stay on top of them, working with ACAT and their advisory groups, so that we can try to make the changes as we can. Some of the platform areas we know that have to be expanded. We know that those are major construction programs in the future, but we do try to work with them and get things done. I'll tell Council Holliday we will follow up on that. It's not always when the next major constructions happen, and we do it mid-period if we can, all right, through the course of working with ACAT.
I can add as well, thank you for those comments. I can add as well that it is always ACAT's preference, and it's our understanding in terms of costing that it is more cost efficient to make those accommodations at the design stage rather than an after the fact change. The design review committee does involve itself from very early stages in the planning, in making recommendations, in assessing the design. It's certainly been an ongoing issue with Line 5 and the multiple stakeholders and proprietary design plans.
He's very good, Moise.
And some of the communication challenges that we've had with Metrolinx and other stakeholders, but TTC and ACAT are making best efforts to make those recommendations as early as possible in the process for cost efficiency.
Thank you. Any other questions? I guess I just have one. So when these issues are raised, whether it's about being included in a video or design issues, how does the board actually find out if, like, how are we updated about whether these, you know, what the outcome of these requests are on these, when we get the updates from ACAT? That's not to Erica, that's to staff.
Through the chair, so the updates would be shared in the minutes at the board meetings, so anything to do with any motions or anything like that would be shared through the minutes at the board meetings.
But that's a motion. So I'm sort of saying in terms of being included in a video, how would we, like, we can't keep track of all the various balls in the air. How do we find out whether these things have been actioned, and if they haven't been actioned, why not?
So through the chair, even outside of motions, within the subcommittee minutes that are summarized here in the minutes, it will list, you know, major projects and things like this that are rectified and dealt with and updated.
Through the chair, why don't we start adding that to the CEO commentary for you?
If you wouldn't mind, that's kind of where I was going. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, no further questions. Can I have a motion to receive the ACAT minutes? Commissioner Lalonde, thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. That carries. Thank you very much, Erica. Appreciate it. I think we're on to
Thank you for your time.
I think we're on to the Special Constable 2022 annual report. I think we have a deputant, Colby, but before we move to Colby, Angela Gibson, here we are.
Yes, good morning.
Don't mind saying a few words.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, we have made some adjustments to this annual report. So you'll find that we've updated this report with some new numbers. I want to just point to the appendix. On page 6, we showed that there were suspensions. There were no suspensions in 2022. And that we've updated the numbers for the special constables, the existing numbers, as well as the appointments that occurred. On page 23 of the appendix, I wanted to point out in the text that that shows the use of force reporting, it shows 7, there should be 6. And then in the following table, in table 10, the number of incidents for internally use of force is 5 and not 6. So just wanted to update those numbers. You'll see that new report reflected on the website as well as in your packages. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Colby.
Okay, good morning. Thank you. So this is TTC Safety and Security, a statistical analysis. This presentation will cover crime trends on the system, calls for service, arrests, apprehensions, and charges, uniform strength comparison to peers, and recommendations. First up, weapons calls. Red line is arrests and occurrences by TTC Special Constables, blue is by TPS, purple is to the combined, and yellow is ridership. So weapons calls have been on a consistent upward trend since 2018, with 116 in 2022, despite reduced ridership during the pandemic. Note the data for TPS arrests and occurrences is not exhaustive and is based on TTC internal reports where TPS was identified as having attended a call and was responsible for the arrest or investigation. It does not capture all TPS activity on the TTC. Next, assaults, including sexual assaults. Assaults have been mostly flat since 2019, but last year saw a total of 980, 100 more than 2021. With a decrease in ridership, remaining riders are much more likely to be victimized. There was a 32% increase from 2018 to 2022, compared to an 8.6 increase citywide during the same period. So assaults on the TTC are growing 4 times faster than they are citywide. Year-end total arrests and occurrences. So this is everything that's happening on the system. After a brief dip in 2020, the total number of arrests and occurrences has eclipsed the previous 2019 high. We are rapidly approaching 10 a day, with 3,268 reports last year. This is a significant undercount of the true amount of crime on the system, though. Everyday passengers are victimized, report it to a TTC employee, but elect not to pursue the matter with special constables or police. That is their right, but these instances are not captured by TTC or police report data. To get a better idea of the true volume of incidents, we have another data set, though. Calls for service received by special constables. Councillor Holiday, in January, you asked about deployment models, and I said that was driven by the distribution of calls, which you can see is dominated by the subway with a modest number from surface routes and the SRT being negligible. There's been a consistent year-over-year increase despite plummeted ridership. Special constables were only able to attend 66% of all calls for service in 2020. That's approximately 9,000 calls, 25 per day, that are not attended. 9,000 potential incidents that are not being reported and included in the previous data set. Emergency vehicle status would greatly improve attendance rates and response times. Here you see the same calls graph, but with enforcement actions in yellow and uniform strength in purple. So as uniform strength grew, special constables were able to attend more calls and make more arrests. However, 2019 saw the start of a decline in enforcement actions with a collapse in 2021, which has since rebounded, but still short of the previous high level of proactivity in 2018. Ratio of annual ridership to in-house peace officers. Councillor Mantis isn't here anymore, I don't think, but he asked for this information in January, which I now deliver as promised. You can see that the TTC has the fewest officers relative to ridership out of all of our peers by far, not close at all. If we had 180 officers by year end, which is the number that the TTC planned to have by the end of 2011, but that was canceled by Bill Blair. If we had 180 officers, Vancouver would still have twice as many as us with their new hires that are coming on this year. DC has 24 times as many officers per rider as we do, 24. So, recommendations. So, I would suggest that the board do the following. Utilize the 2023 emergency funds to start hiring additional special constables beyond those that are already budgeted so that year-end strength reaches 180 officers. The acting chief special constable should review, amend as necessary, and resubmit their 2016 position paper on special constable status enhancements to the Toronto Police Service and Services Board, and considering the transit safety crisis in the City of Toronto, request that it be considered and approved at their May 18th meeting. Pursuant to the new CSPA requirements, the acting chief special constable should submit a request for special constable status in York Region to the YRPB, which shall include the same HDA provisions as listed above. Staff should report back at the June meeting on progress with monthly updates continuing until these initiatives are operationalized. And the board should write a letter to the Solicitor General of Ontario and request that no regulations under the CSPA or any other act be drafted such that they would compromise these authorities for TTC special constables. Thank you for listening. Hard and electronic copies available if you'd like. Happy to take any questions.
Commissioner Holiday, then Commissioner Moyes.
Thank you, Chair. Colby, thank you for the presentation. Two numbers that stick out in my mind is 80 and 180. And I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit around the origin of those numbers. I think I know the answer to 80, but I don't know 180.
Sure, absolutely. So let me just go back to, yeah, we'll go there. So the report states that the actual strength as of December 31st, 2022 was 80 special constables. So that's the year-end total from last year, according to this report. Should be higher now because there has been some hiring happening, so that number is probably larger. I don't know what it is. Staff can tell you exactly what it is right now. The 180, so back in, it was 2007 or 2008, the commission, and this was a plan approved by then CEO Gary Webster, approved a plan to hire, they had about 100 officers, they planned to hire 20 officers every year over a period of years, so that by 2011, they would have 180 officers. And the genesis of that plan was that with then Chair Jim Broney and Mayor Miller's Transit City Plan, which was going to build LRTs all over the city, those would be proof of payment. So if you have a proof of payment route, there needs to be some sort of inspection regime. So TTC identified, well, we need to have a lot more officers. If we're going to build all these extra lines, which are going to generate calls for service and demand, we have to be there to ensure safety of our customers, but also proof of payment. So they plan to hire up to 180 officers. That was axed by Chief Bill Blair. And that's really the genesis of so much that is wrong on the system right now, is that decision. There have been many very bad decisions since then, but that's the genesis of everything that went wrong in the system, is what Bill Blair did back then.
So, but you've described special constables, the fair enforcement officers are outside of that, correct? So there's a pool of them. Is there any rationale then to reduce the number of special constables, because fair inspectors are, although they don't do the same role, they are extra eyes, like they are in a way a resource. Would you have any advice for that, or should we not?
In fact,
count the numbers.
Excellent question, Councillor. In fact, you should do the opposite. So appendix number 1 here that I've put up on the slides. So the TTC's own study pre-COVID estimated revenue losses of $73.5 million a year due to fare evasion. And I think staff said that it would cost $75 million to restore service to 100% levels. Did I hear that correctly? So those numbers are pretty close. So due to ticketing being halted for 3 years, though, there was no fare enforcement for the past 3 years. TTC decided they wouldn't do that. Evasion rates are logically higher now. If you stop enforcement for 3 years, behavior is going to change. So revenue losses are probably higher than that now. Even with fewer people riding, the magnitude of the problem is definitely worse. And we're still waiting on an AG's or a response to the AG report to get more information from staff about this. So the fare inspector program is currently constituted. They can't solve this problem because the Auditor General found that passengers do not respect the authority of TFIs. This is due to their appearance as customer service personnel, not law enforcement officers, and TTC policy prohibits them from exercising their authority to arrest for obstruction of a peace officer, which they have, which every law enforcement officer, every peace officer in Canada has. Courts have consistently ruled on that. So all TFIs right now should immediately transition back to their original uniform, which you can see on the far left picture, and TTC should adopt Go Transit zero tolerance policy. And they have so much more authority, and they have so much more respect instantaneously. People recognize them as a more legitimate authority figure, even though TFIs do have authority under the law. That's not being recognized because of the policy decisions that have been made. So fewer fare inspectors, get rid of them, attrition them out, hire more special constables.
Last question for you, because I'm out of time. What major factors should board members think about when trying to judge right-sizing the force of special constables? And, do you have enough coverage? Do you have enough, there's the charts and the trends, but what are the concepts when designing a force?
Well, just from looking at the top line, look at the graph and see where we are compared to our peers. So do a peer comparison. We're way off the deep end, right? Even if we had 180, we'd still be at the back of the pack by far. We want to be in the middle of the pack. The TTC should be an exceptional organization that is, has some standard with its peers, not way off on the fringes. So there's that. And then in terms of the specific deployment, as I've discussed in previous deputations, you have two things. You need to have reactivity. So when something happens, you need to be able to get there to address the situation. Somebody tragically jumps in front of a train, you need staff to be able to respond to that location. But you also need proactive patrolling, right? So those two things. You need to have officers in cars with emergency vehicle status so they can get places really quick when something bad is happening, but you also want officers walking out on the beat, on foot, being proactive, because that has a very effective impact on deterring crime. And this has been documented by all sorts of studies. You can read some of the ones that I put up there, the effect of having officer presence and what that does to suppressing crime. So those two things are very important. Proactive patrolling, but also emergency response. Those are the two pillars that TTC needs to have enough staff to do both of those things simultaneously. And right now they're doing neither of those things, right? Minimum staffing is 8 officers per shift is the minimum staffing. It's actually 4 because there's a period of time during the day between shift change where there's only 4 officers instead of 8. But yeah, so right now they're not doing either of them because there's so few officers.
Thank you, Commissioner Moyes. I believe you had questions.
Thank you, and through the chair. I'm not crazy about your report, to be quite frank. There's a lot of gaps in there. It reminds me of an iceberg. You're talking about what you can see, but what's not underneath. Last Tuesday was the Doctor's Day, and I, gladly proclaimed, the day and raised the flag and all that stuff. And after the fact, after that meeting, a lot of the physicians and emergency physicians came to me and said that one of the biggest issues they have is that paramedics pick up their patients from the subways and the streetcars and the buses, and as a result, overwhelm the emergency department. And so, in your raw data that you've just displayed here, it just shows the numbers of people arrested and so on and so forth. But the underlying issue here is, I'd like to see, a deeper dive in perhaps, the mental health of those.
Sorry, is there a question?
It's coming.
Because there will be an opportunity to speak.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's coming. So my question to you is that in the arrest that you have made and all the numbers you've showed, do you have any data to show those who have mental health or those who are underhoused in the system that have been arrested and perhaps, yes, you've arrested them, but were there any other options? Was it just, this is what it is?
Sure. So if you look at this chart here, so this is calls for service and then arrests, apprehensions, and charges. So that yellow line is a combination of arrests, apprehensions under the Mental Health Act, and charges as well. And it's kind of like 50-50 between arrests and apprehensions under the MHA. Actually, I can go to it right now because I have it open. I'll tell you the exact number. The number of apprehensions. There were 221 apprehensions under the Mental Health Act in 2022. So that's the data that I have that's contained within the report that's before you today. Information about the prevalence of homelessness and people with mental health issues in the system, that's not data that's available in this report. TTC may or may not have that information. I can tell you something else though. So Streets to Homes outreach program saw 638 services offered to those in need, with 138 being accepted. That was in the report. So that's a 21% acceptance rate for services from Streets to Homes. Maybe that's a good number. I don't know what their average is outside of the TTC when they just engage with other people on the street, but that's a 21% acceptance rate at the cost of $1 million per year. I don't know if that's an effective use of $1 million per year to have a 21% acceptance rate for services. That seems like a bad number to me when $1 million a year could hire 10 special constables. That would be my suggestion.
Okay. So I know in this report you're asking, and yes, I saw the data in regards to how many special constables you have versus other municipalities, but I'm going to challenge you and say that, our needs are very different. So are you asking for more special constables to do mental health work, or what is your messaging here? I'm not quite sure.
I don't accept the premise that the TTC's needs are that.
I'm asking for clarification.
Utilizing their authorities under the Mental Health Act is well within the purview of special constables. That's one of their core function, is to identify people who are in crisis and for their own health and well-being need to see a physician in a hospital. Ideally, CAMH would be the best place for them. So that's within the purview of special constables, but I reject the premise that TTC has different needs than Vancouver or Montreal or Edmonton or Calgary. I think that all cities in Canada are dealing with similar issues, so I wouldn't accept the premise that we have very different needs from those in Vancouver or Montreal. Vancouver's probably worse, honestly. That the issues that they're experiencing with homelessness and drug addiction are definitely worse there than they are here. So,
okay, fair enough. Just one more thing, Mr. Chair. I've received a few emails from people saying that as presentations are taking place, they can't see it at home on YouTube. So, whatever.
Did you have a question beyond that? Because we'll hold your time. No, seriously. No. Thank you. Is that normal that people can't see the presentation? Sure. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? So I just have a couple. Sorry. Actually, just one. You talked about giving, and thank you for coming in and compiling all that data.
You're welcome.
It's a lot of work.
Many months.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that. I know you've talked about it before, so you know the question probably coming from me about the emergency vehicle status. How do you see that as being beneficial?
So right now, you can see the number of calls for service. It's 30,000 a year, right? So it's a lot, and the attendance rate was only 66% in 2020. And a big reason for that is the officers that are in their vehicles on patrol, taking calls for service. They'll get a call for service that'll be an hour away from where their location is, but they have to go there. It could be a serious incident, and they attend weapons calls, as I showed, assaults. They're attending a lot of the same things that Toronto police officers are, but just incidents that are happening on the system, and more minor issues as well, but still emergency situations. Somebody acting disorderly on a platform, that's an emergency situation for the TTC. It's not a high priority for Toronto police, but somebody who's stumbling around on a platform, might be intoxicated. That's an emergency. That turns into a priority one very quickly. So they're getting sent to these calls and taking many minutes or even hours to attend those calls because they're sitting in traffic at a red light, and they could be going even to an officer needs assist call, an assault in progress. A TTC collector or an operator might be getting assaulted, and they're sitting at a red light trying to get to that call for service. Toronto Police may not have the resources to attend it. In fact, Toronto Police doesn't have the resources to attend it, because you can see what's happening with Toronto Police right now. They've lost 800 constables since 2009. I don't need to tell you that. You know that. Other people don't. 800 constables less now than 2009. So they have, TPS is one of the lowest ratios of officers per 100,000 people served in most major cities. And there's a 19-minute response time for priority one calls. The highest priority calls for Toronto Police, there's a 19-minute response time. So TPS does not have the capacity to respond to all the things happening on the subway. So the TTC's own officers need to have that ability to go to their calls that are important for them and might not have, TPS doesn't have the resources to go to them. That it's very important. And Toronto Police, the frontline officers, they're in support of this. Every officer I talk to in the frontline, they want this. And very often on an ad hoc basis in the past, you've had Toronto Police Communications, there might be a collision between a TTC bus and another vehicle, and they'll say, we don't have any officers to go to this right now. You guys, we're gonna just allow you to do this one time, close the road, use your cruiser, block off the road, because we can't send anybody to this collision scene right now. We don't have the manpower. That's happened in the past. So it's already happened in the past. It's time for a formal framework for this to happen so that they can respond to serious incidents that are happening that TPS just cannot get to on their own. And that lifts a burden on TPS, because TPS gets called to go to subway stations to remove people for trespassing. That happens every night. When subway stations close and somebody doesn't want to leave, that person can't be allowed to stay in the station. It's a safety hazard. So TPS has to go to those kind of calls. It's a huge burden on their service when they have more priority incidents happening in the city. So let special constables take that burden off of TPS officers.
Okay, thanks. And not to argue with you, I just wanted to kind of clarify your vision of special constables. I would suggest that if there's a weapons call, that special constables have very limited use of force options, and that maybe that's better handled by the police. I would also suggest if there's a policing issue that needs to be addressed. I'd further suggest going all the way across town for a call is not the best use of our resources, right?
Well,
and that might go back to your previous point of you need more special constables. Yeah. That's kind of what I'm trying to parse out. I just don't, and if there's a trespassing call, I can guarantee you that's not a lights and siren go through intersections at Young and to get there, but
other calls are. I mean,
some. But anyway, I'm not. I just wanted to kind of clarify what your vision of special constables are, and I think it's probably a little bit wider than maybe what the Commission's view, and probably, quite frankly, the police services view of the special constables.
I would just say that in Montreal, this is how it works there, and the special constables in Montreal are always shocked to learn that here in Ontario, Ottawa, OC Transpro and and Toronto don't have the same authority to respond to incidents. It works very well in Montreal. Montreal Police has always been in support of that. They work hand in glove. So I just think it's a cultural problem here where we have very narrow thinking.
Okay, but thanks again. I
You're welcome.
appreciate it. Were there any other questions? Okay. Any speakers? Oh, sorry, question to staff. Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a question to staff on this. So there's a whole bunch of categories of incidents. Some of the top ones I found were assault, utter threats, mischief, mental health, theft under, assault with bodily harm or with a weapon. How does the system gauge the urgency of response by a special constable? And back to the comment about, some are lights and siren response and some are not. How do we figure out which ones they have to run to and which ones they don't?
Through the chair, that would be based on.
Could you just turn the mic?
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, better now. Yeah.
Thank you. Through the chair, that would be based on the information that we're receiving on the call. So if we're getting a call that there's an active assault happening, then that would be more serious than maybe somebody walking through the station causing a bit of a disturbance. So it's really the information that we're getting that will determine how serious the incident is.
Is that structured or is that a judgment call of the call taker? And the reason I say that is I know under the 911 system, there's some very formal questions that are asked, and that matrix determines the response level. But do we have that same type of thing, or is it more judgment and experience?
I think it's more judgment and experience.
Okay.
So based on, again, the information that they're getting, they'll relay it to us, and then it becomes also the judgment of the officers and the information that they're receiving to determine how serious it is.
And based on your experience, what proportion of the calls that are taken in do you have actually eyes on them, whether it's a camera or a staff person on scene that can provide you real-time information?
We do have a special constable up at the Transit Control Center, so when a call comes in and it's very serious, they will usually pull up the cameras so that they can update us and give us real-time information.
The last question is the hard one. Do we escalate with urgency when there's a delay to the transit system? So for instance, I appreciate, someone that may be hanging around on a platform you may not rush to, but if somebody vanishes into the tunnel and essentially is trespassing inside the tunnel, I would suppose that probably triggers a stop in the system, right? And then you start to have thousands of passengers backing up. Do you elevate the response, not because of the severity of the incident, but because of the impact on the system and what it does to riders? Or is there a practice to that?
I would say it's probably both. It is the seriousness and the impact that it does have on service.
Okay. Are there practices from other systems that we could draw upon? And where I'm going with this, obviously, is that I would like to see a stronger and bigger practice that when there is a delay, that stuff really gets escalated. And it's less about a pure safety or an enforcement issue, but more of the system is stopped. And so we need to drop everything and go and deal with it.
Through the chair, if I could, Nicole is the acting head of the area. She's done a great job, and thank you very much for answering the questions. I'd let you know that I find it amazing that the work that these frontline employees do, the supervisors and the special when something happens, when you gave the perfect example of people on the right-of-way, it's like they all come in out of nowhere, all right? The urgency is very much there for all frontline employees, and the special constables in particular, with the work that they do on a regular basis that exceeds even what other police officers would do, cutting power, walking track, priority ones, they're the ones there. So yes, the urgency, I see it from where I stand. They call the control center dispatch, who's ever the closest there regarding the urgency. We've had some severe weapon calls in stations, and they're always right there for us. So I want to pass along a thank you to Nicole and her staff.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. That's very helpful. And it just, to further to that, yes, I understand that there's a logic and a matrix on paper, and then there's the actual. So that's a reassuring answer. And I really appreciate that, because none of us know what happens behind the scenes. So it's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Moyes, and then Commissioner Jagdale.
Thank you, and through the chair, just two questions really, and maybe, I don't know if this is the right place for this question, but your response time to these incidents that Councillor Hawley is talking about, like what's the average response time if there's an emergency, let's say young and blower? And probably just as a sidebar, and you may not have this information now, but maybe that's something that you could share with me at some point when I do a site visit, if that's possible, is, where these officers are located, like in zones perhaps. Because if something happens, let's say at Finch or at Kipling, like it's a huge city, right? I mean, how do you place people? Where do you place them strategically?
Through the chair. So we would have to cover the east end, the north end, and the west end of the city. We have a team that's mobile, and then we usually have a team in the core of the subway on foot to respond to calls. That would be at our minimum staffing. When we have more officers, then we'll utilize them and put more people in the subway where needed. If we have more incidents in the east end, then we'll put a team in the east or north. We might even have an extra car, again, depending on what the numbers are.
Okay. I'd like to have a better understanding of the setup, but this is not the place for it, but I'd perhaps at some point, perhaps if any other commissioner wants to, go on a tour and just to have a deep dive on this, that would be helpful. Thank you.
If I could, through the chair and I have had discussions on exactly what you've been asking for, Councillor. So what we'll do is we'll provide you with a briefing note, provide all of council on the outline of the status of the job roles and responsibilities the special constables do, and it also has a deployment strategy behind it. So we'll provide a package just on that, and then we'll set a meeting up with you to come out in the front line. The chair and I will be going out later on this month as well. Thank you.
You're more than welcome to come. Is that it? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Commissioner Jagdale.
Through the chair, I'm part of my ignorance, but I don't really know how to read Chart 4, 2022 Streets to Home Partnership, the CEU and Streets to Home Partnership graph that talks about the number of services offered and then what was accepted and what was declined. So I just would like some more clarification on how to look at this and how to interpret what the implications are. In particular, what are we defining as services offered? Accepted, I guess, is the various organs or partnerships that we have saying that they want services. Declined, obviously, is the opposite of that. Is that sort of the right approach here? Like how should we be looking at this?
That's exactly right. Yes.
Okay. So couple questions. Is services off? Is the accepted and declined amount supposed to add up to services offered?
Not necessarily. I know that the services offered so Streets to Homes does a lot of work in the field. So they're going to ask people if they need, obviously, shelter. They're going to ask folks if they need any assistance. So it should tally up, I believe. But I'm not. I can.
So none of it tallies.
I could do a deep dive into that.
I just want to know, because if we're like missing data, like obviously for February, right? There's 11 actions based off of 16. Yeah.
So we can follow up with Streets to Homes and get you and get a really fulsome explanation for you.
Okay, that'd be terrific. Just understanding that, and then I guess
I could, through the chair, if you wouldn't mind, Councillor, because we have a report coming back in June. I mean, Commissioner, I apologize.
No offense.
That will be coming back. That'll give the full detail. I don't know if Wendy wants to chime in, because you're working with the police as well as the the streets to homes in the city on this, about a full detail of how the streets to homes work. Keisha and I have spent time on the all-night shift working with streets to homes as well. The amount of work that they have and the people that are being taken care of, it really is incredible work by them, and with the special constables and all the station personnel. I'll actually forward you all an email that I sent to the chair just to give you an outline of what's happening on the all-night with these crews.
That'd be terrific.
Certainly, I would just, maybe through the chair, like to offer that in addition to the numbers that are presented here up until 2022, the Streets to Homes program has expanded significantly. So we'd see that through January and February, their activity and outreach has probably expanded about 5 times. And so the relationship of how many people are picking up on the offers of services have also changed. They've made relationships through all of those connection times. And so the proportion of people that are taking up on services have started to increase as they built those relationships. But the overall volumes are significantly higher than we would have seen in 22 because of that expansion.
Yeah, which is a terrific thing, right? If we're talking about a non-invasive action to try and drive a safer system, this is one of the marquee initiatives that we're doing. But then it begs the question, when we look at October through December and we think about the services that were accepted versus services that were declined, it's a stark difference. Right, so what could be driving some of that? Where we're offering the service, we think this is going to be a great idea to drive safety and reduce homelessness in the system, but people aren't taking it. So what's going on? Is it there's a fear? Is it people are sketched out by the service itself? And then how do we make those numbers much more palatable?
Through the chair, that is what we understand, that when these services are initially introduced, individuals that could benefit from them, they don't know the individuals. They're apprehensive. They need to develop those relationships. And so some of it is a matter of time and outreach, and some of it is a matter of having additional individuals that they recognize through the system. What we found is that in addition to being able to develop those relationships through the Streets to Homes workers, the relationship that those individuals have with One Community Solutions workers has also been important. This is a community that understand each other, they recognize each other, they're familiar faces, and the more that is taking place, the higher the uptake on receiving those services has been.
Okay, so not to like extrapolate, but you're saying there's a positive relationship between developing a relationship with a special constable in this unit and then potential uptake in actually receiving the services.
That's correct, but we would not call them special constables.
Sorry, right. CEU.
Yeah.
We have, through the chair again, we've definitely learned from the Streets to Homes program about their ability to develop relationships with these individuals and getting people help, right? If people recall, just a few months ago, we had hundreds of people staying overnight. I think we're up to 5 or 6 a night now as we continue to work with those people. So they make a big difference. It's impressive.
Right. I just have one more question. I know I have only 20-ish seconds. But I wanted to inquire about Table 7, the general occurrences reports and records of arrests. So this information is great, but it's not in relation to anything. So is there a way for us to see what the delta was from 21 or 22 rather, or 21? Yes.
We can provide that information to you. Yes.
Yeah, it would just be great to understand where the major increases are as we start to think about resource deployment and whatnot. And as this relates back to CEU, if we're seeing some of the major issues stemming from those major problems, then there's likely some action that can be taken there to drive some better results. So it would be great to see that.
Yeah, we'll provide that information to you, and then we can, going forward, we can also include that delta for future reports.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions of staff? Any speakers? Great. Can I have a motion to adopt the report recommendations? Commissioner Moyes, all those in favor? Thank you, carried. Islington Station redevelopment. I believe we have a speaker. Brad Pearson?
Thank you for letting me speak today. It's more regarding Islington Station is not an accessible station, if I'm aware. It's getting accessibilized in 2024, but it's under construction. One of my questions is to you guys is, would you consider maybe making it more? I don't know how to say this, but it's like it's dull right now. There's no color to it. Maybe making it more colorful. Like, you know how when you go to Stockholm, Sweden, or European countries, their stations are very beautiful, colorful, and people are attracted to them because people know, okay, well, this is bright colors, it's nice. Could Islington Station have a more attractive entrance, more accessibility that you could provide sooner so that you don't have to wait so much for the elevators, but people could use the bus network as an alternative?
Thank you. Do you have anything else to add? We can ask that question, but I know you're just sort of speaking at this point, but did you have any more comments or concerns about Islington Station that we could then ask staff to address?
Yeah, one of my concerns is that because it's not accessible, a lot of people have to transfer between buses between the 37 and the 110. You can't go, if you got to go to Royal York or Kipling, and you need to go between Islington, Royal York, or Islington and Kipling. You can't really do that. You'd have to walk. So maybe extending the 49 Bloor West bus from Kipling Station to Royal York Station, and having it service Islington Avenue and Royal York, because I feel if you had that, then you would have more customers servicing the Islington area, but also it would provide another alternative to Islington Station when Islington Station is not accessibilized, because we know the Blue Knight only operates until from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. when the subway opens, and then on weekends it opens at 6 and then 8 a.m. So maybe having more of a corridor in the area as a temporary replacement for the elevators until they open.
Okay, thank you. Were there any questions of the speaker? Okay, thank you. Any questions of staff? Commissioner Holliday? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions to staff. I know Islington very well, and I would agree with the speaker. It's perhaps not the most vibrant of spaces. It has that 1950s look, if you like it. Goes well with the pigeons. But I just wondered maybe if staff could comment about if there's any vibrancy to the new design and artwork that might be integrated into the new station design, because the renderings are in the report, but just to the speaker, if there's a comment we could offer.
Through the chair, yes, we do have an allowance within the construction cost to do artwork within the station.
Great.
And I'll add, if I could, through the chair, that as you're aware, every element of the new stations have a public art component, right? So we'll do significant outreach with the neighborhoods and the design and make sure we incorporate that.
Thank you. My other questions are actually about the structure and circulation. I wondered if staff could comment as to whether or not there will be temporary provisions during the construction and permanent provisions for a passenger drop-off and pickup area.
Through the chair, yes, there will be temporary during construction access to it. And again, Rob, can you just say talk about the PUDO, if what the drop-off and plans are, please?
Do you hear me? Hello? Through the chair, yes, we will have a PPUDO temporary arrangement during the construction to allow for that function to be continuous through the construction phase.
Is there a permanent passenger drop-off and pickup area? I couldn't glean that from the plans that are in this report. I'm genuinely interested. It's one of the two stations I use most.
Yes, there will be a permanent measure for continued PPUDO after the construction.
Okay, and does that include spaces for taxi stand and for rideshare?
That would be included as well. In addition to that, as you may know, the space will also be developed following our construction by Create TO, and there will be a tower at the corner of Islington and Bloor that will also have share the laneway space with us out to Aberfoyle. So there will be those types of amenities, I believe, are included in that development as well.
Great. And can staff provide a comment about what the future is for the east side of Islington Avenue, north of Bloor? And the reason I raise that is that it's a very, very popular bus stop. It's almost as popular as the station itself, and there's often a crowd of people, but it's not the most modern public realm and public space. There's minimal shelter there. It's otherwise very, very busy, and we're doing all this work on the west side on the station, but are we looking at the east side? And I'll note that there is an entrance to the subway station there that takes you into the existing office building and back down under the road. I wonder if we could just have some comment on that.
I can respond.
Yeah, on you go, Rob.
So our mandate under the Easier Access project is to make one accessible route to all levels throughout the station. And that is satisfied by the work we're doing on the west side. As you know, through the current terminal, it's in a state where many of the bus bays are out of service. So that the new terminal that we're building as a second phase of this project will satisfy that. The east side of the station is not part of our work.
May I, through the form of a question, ask staff if we could take this offline another day, because this wouldn't be the spot to dig into all the details, but I'd love to be able to help. And in particular, if there's an opportunity to work with the city on it. Because as I said, I know the station well, and I'd like to see us capture every opportunity, even if it's not part of this contract that we're going to approve today. It's just a little spot that bothers you every time you pass by or pass through it that perhaps we could do better. But I would say that's collective beyond the TTC. It's to do with the city as well. Okay, thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
No, thank you. Anybody else? Any speakers? No, we're good. Can I have a motion to adopt the recommendations? Commissioner Holiday, all those in favor, thank you, carried. Item number 5. Item number 7, making electronic participation for the TTC permanent. Do we have a speaker on this? Yep. We have a speaker on this. Hi, Alan.
Good morning.
Please go ahead.
According to today's CEO report, ridership is still only about 69% of pre-COVID levels. This report goes on further to suggest that part of this lower ridership is likely due to hybrid work practices. In March of this year, City Council authorized local boards to amend their rules of procedure to permit electronic participation by board members and the public. However, City Council also amended the report's recommendations to adopt a motion encouraging council members to attend meetings in person except where there is a rationale to participate electronically. Remember that ridership is still about only 69% of what it used to be. Part of this board's mandate is to increase ridership on the TTC. Adopting this report will actually decrease ridership, not increase it. It sends a message that even the TTC doesn't want to take the TTC to get to work. People phoning in their depths aren't taking the TTC that day. We are losing those riders and their fares. This report says that there are no financial impacts in adopting these recommendations, but we are spending $89,000 this year to do electronic meetings, sorry. I don't work for the TTC, so I don't make TTC kind of money. I sure as heck don't work for the City Hall, so I don't make that kind of money either. So let me translate this for you. $89,500 is the equivalent of 10 years of Ontario Works payments. That's based on the in a single person's eligibility. $89,500 is 726 fare passes. Are there not better ways to spend this $89,000? Full disclosure, it's easier for me to do deputations from home. I got to spend the last 3 years doing deps in my knickers. We should encourage a return to normal pre-pandemic setting by setting the example of returning to office ourselves for our meetings. After all, is this the message we want to send to our customers? Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Okay. Yeah, sure. Why don't we move to speakers? Commissioner Holiday?
I just want to acknowledge the presentation from the deputy today. I thought you brought home a point that I think members of council are sensitive to. The motion that was put up on the screen about encouraging members to council to attend in person was mine. That was among an interesting discussion on the council floor about involving our chair even. Can we put some weight behind, although we would open the door to electronic participation, how do we send the message that we'd like people to come in person because the meetings just work better? I think in my opinion, and I'll just speak for myself to my colleagues on the board, I'm willing to accept electronic participation personally, just because I think it's a great business continuity option. It deals with days when there's a snowstorm or something happens that we can still save a meeting. But I don't want to move the motion I moved at council today, and the reason is actually quite direct. At council, we're paid to be there, and we receive remuneration for our time. But I'm willing to be a little more flexible because part of this board is made by essentially citizen volunteers, and I think extending a bit more flexibility is always helpful. But in my personal humble experience, sitting in numerous committees and so on, I always felt it was better in person because you just got that subtlety in the room. And, it's great to see people here, and I understand sometimes they need to be hybrid. But I'm quite prepared to support the recommendations reports and to thank the speaker for raising an important point that we should all think about. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Moyes.
I have to say that Councillor Holiday and I disagree on many, many things. But on this instance, I actually agree with him. In that even though my staff are here Monday to Friday, working in these offices, but I know as a former school board trustee, when we did the hybrid option, we found more participation. People, it's an equity issue, right? Because people cannot always get down here. But you allow others who wouldn't normally be able to participate by using a hybrid or online session. So I think that's good on you. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Yeah, I do have a motion. So a couple things. As Commissioner Holiday alluded to, or mentioned actually, we did discuss this at council. I would have actually loved to have forced every council member to be in the chamber. That didn't happen, unfortunately. I feel that staff are forced to be here, and the board needs to be here. I do agree with Commissioner Moyes, though, that it is more inclusive if the general public can access remotely, and that's why I think that cost has to be incurred for the participation of the public. I think the biggest issue is, of all places where we need to show leadership, it's at the TTC, where every meeting is about our low ridership and our budget problems. So we know the number one thing we can do, or that can happen to get the ridership numbers back, is actually people returning to work. So I think that we need to show that leadership. That said, I don't think we're necessarily at that point where we can make those decisions, given the nature of the pandemic itself and the direction it can turn. So my motion basically is saying, I'll put it back up on the screen, please, and leave it there. Thanks. Is asking that we permit electronic participation for 1 year. And I think things are still in flux as it relates to the pandemic, and that we review it again in 1 year. And that might be a more appropriate time to make a more binding decision. Anyone have any questions? So I guess we just vote on this? No, I was the last speaker. Okay. No. It's the opposite. So the recommendation was to make electronic participation of the board permanent. I'm saying let's do it for 1 more year and reevaluate where we're at. So I'm just saying don't make it permanent right now. Wait a year and see where we're at with our ridership numbers, with the pandemic and all those other things. It doesn't negate making it permanent. And of course, I would be in favor of making it permanent for participation by the general public. I just think as a board, we need to be here. And I want to wait a year till we can assess all the information as things are constantly changing. I know it's going to kill you to support me, isn't it? I know it's going to kill you. Can we take a vote? Yeah. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Thank you. Oh, the item is amended. All those in favor? That carries. Thank you. This concludes the business of the meeting. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Commissioner Moyes, thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. Thanks, everybody.